Philip Schwenk is my name. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Basically, I've been in education for about 24 years now. I've been kind of all over the place. I was in LA for 16 years. I'm now in Cleveland. I'm in my 8th year in Cleveland. I was a teacher for 12 years. I've been an administrator for 14 years. If you do the math, that seems like more than 24 years. It's because I was both a teacher and an administrator at some point. I've started several schools in LA. I've worked in charter schools and major districts in both LA and Cleveland. So I was a social studies teacher. So basically I have a family, a wife, 2 boys, 19, 21. I just became an empty nester, so this is like one of those interesting places in life. It's a nice little transition for me as well. I was born in Colorado, grew up in New Mexico, went to college in Philly, then I went to LA for 16 years, and now I'm in Cleveland and coming to Toledo. So I've kind of been around. I've seen all the kind of the regional differences in different schools in different parts of the country. So that's kind of a quick piece on me. I'm open to any questions. You'll find them very transparent, so please ask me what you will. So that's quick. So any questions? Well, it's a public school, so the only requirements are that your child is actually a child that is of the right age that can come into the school. If we get a significant number of applicants, of course, it turns into a lottery system. As a public school, you have to have a lottery system. But right now, it's basically you come, first serve. So if you kind of get first dibs, you can get in. But as a public school, you can't have specific requirements beyond that. So, yes?
Is there a particular number of students that will be allowed in a classroom? So, I mean, do you have a quota that you, I mean, are you only allowed to have 20, 15? What's your, how many students?
Well, there's actually state law as far as ratios. So like 1 to 29 is often, we're probably going to sit around 20, 25. We're going to have 9 grades, so you have K-8. We're looking at about 250 kids. Obviously, if there was a significant demand, we could get extra teachers and double up. First year, we probably wouldn't do that. It'll probably be one class per grade, K-8. Over time, long term, our hope is to have 2 sections of each grade. So we would eventually maybe hit 600, 700 kids would be nice, but that's down the road, and that's our optimism. So, yep.
Just a fairly basic question. Public school in Ohio, assuming not open to Michigan residents?
No, you know, it's funny, because that just came up in a question this last week. My understanding is you can actually have a student from Michigan, but we wouldn't get funding for it. So you'd have to set up like a tuition piece. We're still playing with that. Right now, it's an Ohio school. My assumption would be that the vast majority of our kids are from Ohio. If this is actually the first time I've been close enough to a state border, where that's an interesting question to me. So this is actually new to me. Obviously, being in LA, if you've ever been to LA, there's nowhere near us in another state for miles and miles and miles. So this is the first time that's actually been a question I've had to think about. Hey, kids could come from Michigan. My understanding right now, and don't quote me on that, but my understanding is that you can, but you're just not going to get money for them, and so there'd probably be a tuition issue there. So, yes.
Are you going to support special ed teachers with kids with IEPs?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, by law, you have to, and it's actually just best practice, So, yeah, no, we will have a special ed population. Yes.
How would it work with siblings? Like my daughter is going to be in kindergarten next year, and her brother's 3 years after her. Would he automatically get in if she gets in?
There's definitely preferential treatment given to siblings of children.
Okay.
So, yeah. And that's actually legal, by the way. That's not just me speaking. You can actually do that. So, yep. Yes?
How do you anticipate finding teachers
to
be on board with the classical education? Because the 2 big teacher colleges around here.
Oh, believe me, Lee has very strong opinions on that. Sure, well, and I generally agree. It's actually rather difficult, and the licensure process in Ohio isn't making it any easier. I don't know if you guys know the law on licensure, but if you went through our interviewing process, you would see how rigorous it is. In fact, it's an area that we've been actually pretty well complimented. I mean, people kind of go through that process like, well, this definitely seems like it's going to be a classical ed. So we're very serious about making sure that we get people on board that are on the same page. So it is more difficult, like you said. I mean, you have a bunch of kids now that are coming out of college with a very strongly kind of progressive bent. I've been in that world for years, so I can navigate that world pretty well. It's part of my excitement about this work is I guess in my mind, there's an honesty in classical education that is lacking, I think, on the other side, to be frank. So it is a difficult. I mean, I'm fully convinced that we'll get a full cast of teachers that are committed to that piece. Of course, a lot of that's my work.
Right.
if I'm bumping into teachers that are veering off, and then it becomes my challenge to either center them on our mission, or I love you and you're a great person, but I mean, that's kind of the hard part of my task. But we have a specific commitment we have to classical education that we'll be keeping.
Okay. And
So-
One thing about that, so
Absolutely.
we just had our second round of interviews last Saturday. Yeah, last Saturday.
Saturday, yep.
It was a very long day, but a very good day,
Productive
because
day, yes.
I was pleasantly surprised that we had a great group of people who were academically excellent but committed to classical education.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of people who are in existing traditional school situations and are unhappy with it are attracted to us. People who were educators professionally and went into being, let's say, a full-time stay-at-home mom, for example, and then are attracted to this mission, are being drawn to it. So I'm pleasantly surprised with the ability to find people who are mission focused.
Yep.
And then once you train them, would you say 2 weeks in the summer beforehand?
At least.
Okay, at least. It's hard to stay on that path for a new teacher throughout the year, especially if you've taught this way and you might try to sway back to it. So is there ongoing training?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'm a big PD, professional development in the ED. It's constant, meaning I have weekly meetings with teachers, and then we actually have in the calendar, we have 19 PD days, to give you an idea. So I'm highly committed to that, and I think obviously a new teacher, even a teacher that's experienced, needs to constantly be in a dialogue with not only their colleagues, but with me. Keep in mind, as an administrator, I'm often in the classroom anyways. Like I'm more the kid guy than I am I love turning the lights on and off guy. So, so I like being around the education going on, so I'm very much in the classroom, I'm watching what's going on, and I would be very sensitive to people veering off of what our mission is. So, cool.
Thank you.
Yep.
If there was a student who was maybe struggling to keep up, say, in a large classroom, maybe a few are a little bit slower at learning, but they're doing well. I mean, is there a standard set up to help children that may be a little bit slower at learning? They're doing well, but just a little behind to catch
Sure.
up with everyone, or how would that work with one teacher per however many kids are in the class?
Well, to me, an inherent aspect of a good teacher is the ability to see kids where he or she is at. Any good teaching understands that people learn differently. So really kind of the push and pull in any school, but especially in the kind of class schools, you have this kind of high expectation. We want the kids to learn a lot, but we also have to meet the kid where he or she is at. So the answer is yes, and that would be my expectation. Answering that question becomes a case-by-case situation, right? Because it depends what that child needs. And this gets into like special ed law and stuff that people were asking about. Sometimes that could be paraprofessionals, for example, if that's something we need over time. It's the use of the teacher group as a whole. Maybe there's kind of pull-out spaces where we can work with certain kids. There's a lot of different ways that educators do that, but my expectation is that we're sensitive to every child that walks in. So without watering down expectations. That's actually the important part about kind of pushing here, because what's happening a lot now is we're really pushing everything down when I really believe that all kids can learn. So it's just really about kids just learn differently, and it's our job to kind of get to them into that space. Okay? Yes?
What degree does family culture play a role in the success of the students, and particularly today when we see a lot of adverse realities
Sure.
of life? And how does the school navigate that to help foster excellence there within its purview?
Sure. Well, the first part of the question, of course, is extremely important. You're the primary educator, period. I'm always mindful of that. I always kind of look at you've kind of just let us borrow your kids for a moment and we bring them back to you, but you're the primary. So my expectation in any school is that you're part of that discussion. You'll find that I'm very open to parents being involved. In fact, I would tend, based on even these forums I'm seeing and parents and their involvement, I would probably be more one of those administrators having to deal more with, hey, you've been awesome. No, you can't be in the class for 24/7, but hey, that's great. I'd rather have that conversation. A lot of times I find myself, especially being in urban settings, it's just trying to pull parents into the schools. My expectation is that parents would be involved. I think it's extremely important, and it really is connected to not just the learning that's going in the classroom, but just the general culture of the school, which I think is actually really important. So I get a lot of questions on, are there going to be clubs, are there going to be sports and stuff like that, and the answer is yes, but then they'll say, what are they? And I'm like, well, that's really going to come out of you guys and your kids. So what are you interested in? What do you guys want to have clubs about? What do you want to be studying? Those types of things. So I think the more your voice as a parent is in it, the more relevant we become. part of my intrigue in community schools, or what we call charter schools in California, is that they come out of the ground. They come from the people in that community. And so my expectation is to honor a lot of their value in what we're doing. And I think the best way to understand what that value is to have an ongoing dialogue with parents. So, there's a question here? Yes.
Will you do some sort of like a gifted program, or if you have a student that is more advanced in subjects, are they able to, do work in higher grades, even though they might be in a, say third grade and advance to higher grades for certain subjects?
So the first part of the question is different than the second part of the question. Is there going to be a gifted program? Originally, I would say no, but the way I'd answer that question is the same way I'd ask for a child that's struggling. The issue is I should know the child, and I need to keep the kid where the kid's being most, stimulated and rigorous and pushing them forward. What that means, again, is a case by case. Like you mentioned the idea of like different grades. Well, that's a whole discussion. Talk about parents. I mean, we have to have a discussion about that, because just because I'm content able or subject able doesn't mean I might have the maturity. There's obvious examples, right? I'm not going to take a 7-year-old and put him with a bunch of 10-year-olds because she can do, let us say, 5th grade work. That may not be the best thing to do as far as class placement. But if there's a kid that's 7 and is able to do like 5th grade work, that's a whole other conversation, and we need to meet that child where that child is. So we'd have discussions about what that looks like. How do I differentiate a classroom? How do I differentiate the space of the school to make sure that student's not getting bored? Keep in mind this school is supposed to move to K-12, so we're going to have high school classes. And if there's like a demand, like if there's a kid that really, really wants to go to college and wants to start taking like college level classes, we can start having discussions about AP coursework or coursework at local colleges, or there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. But again, that's family by family. And a lot of it I'll have to kind of feel out as far as what the demand is. What do we need in this community to keep our kids stimulated and at their tops game? We're using Singapore, but the child is more important than the curriculum.
Okay.
I don't know how to say that.
Great.
I mean, the child is always more important. If you've gone to training for something like Singapore, for example, you can go to any training. I've been in ed long enough. They always say that. That's always true.
Right.
Don't veer off at all from anything we're doing, because this is perfect. I mean, that's what educators hear like constantly all the time. So all these are great tools. It's important to see them as tools. They're tools that we're using with a kid that is more important. So, use all the cliches. I've said this for years. We don't teach, let's say, physics. I've been a high school guy we teach children physics. Okay? It's just how you look at things and how you view things. So, yes, we're using Singapore, but I realize that not all kids will do it exactly as we envision it to be.
Will you guys be teaching creation and evolution, or is it a faith-based school?
Again, two different questions there. No, it's not a faith-based school. It's a public school. Part of what makes classical education, in my mind, different from other spaces, in fact, I was just talking about this on the way here, I actually see classical education as a little bit more open, meaning we're willing to have reasonable discourse over those things. Where if you go into what's going on in schools right now, let's use that as an example. Evolution truth, if you don't agree with it, you're being foolish. That's kind of what you're hearing in schools today. You can't take the idea of evolution entirely out of curriculum. In fact, I would advocate you should probably be able to talk about it. So to me, it's about, could you hear discussions about both in a classical school? And the answer to that would be yes, which is actually totally different than what you're seeing in other schools. I think you're hearing just one piece of the picture. So my hope would be, if you look at what happens in a classical space is you have this early kind of grammar piece, right? Kids kind of get a bunch of information, and then it turns into like being able to logic, being able to be rational, and then rhetoric. If you really want to get into good rhetoric, our ability to discuss things about it, we have to have dissenting points of view. I have to know what I'm arguing with, right? So that's actually a good one to set up. If you're going to argue with somebody from a creationist point of view, let's say you're arguing against evolution, you should have some idea what the evolutionist is trying to argue, or your arguments become kind of empty. If it just becomes just because. I just don't like your idea just because. That just seems sounds foolish. So the question when you say is it taught, there is a curriculum the state kind of puts out there. It's not that we will totally ignore evolution. What I would say about our classrooms is there's going to obviously be an open dialogue about what our values are and what we think about this concept. And it's the idea of teaching something as theory versus truth. That's actually really important to recognize that. The way it's being taught in a lot of just kind of what we're calling progressive schools, it's truth. I can tell you for years being in the classroom, I've had many kids come to me over the years about I don't even know what to say, Schwenk. I don't agree with it at all. I said, well, these are things you could say. It's about having ideas that we can talk about. So we don't shy away from the fact that evolution is a major part of our discourse today. Okay, but we open it up to a dialogue where you can have contrarian points of view, and that's fine. In fact, I would argue, what are your arguments going to be? How are you going to contrary what you're hearing? So, does that answer your question? Okay, great. Yes?
I don't know how to ask it, but philosophy on homework and where it fits in how much.
Okay, that's a great question. Okay, yes, there is homework. Now that's revolutionary, by the way, right now in a lot of public schools, but it shouldn't be. But there is this expectation that kids go home and they practice. Okay, this is actually where you can actually be involved in their learning as well. I think it's not just about them practicing, but they get to talk to their parents and have their parents talk about what's going on, and they know what's going on, those types of things. Obviously, giving a 5-year-old 3 hours of homework, probably inappropriate. Okay, I can only imagine trying to get a 5-year-old through 3 hours of homework. The numbers that we're seeing is about 10, maybe 15 minutes per grade is kind of a norm. Okay, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old taking on 10 to 15 minutes of homework is reasonable. Okay, by the time you get to high school, obviously, if you're only getting 10 minutes of homework, that's probably a problem. Okay, so maybe by that time you're at a couple hours, maybe 3 hours, depending on how rigorous the coursework is and those types of things. So the expectation is yes, they know how to do homework. Okay, because keep in mind, as an educator, that's a soft skill as well, right? That's not just about the content. It's the ability to be organized and be able to keep your stuff together and to learn on your own and learn how to learn and how to do all these things on your own, how to take a paper home and how to take a paper back. They seem like simple things, but that's increasingly a struggle. Okay, watching kids even have to go to a locker and get books out and move to some other space and use those books. It sounds like most of us were raised like that. It's actually a huge skill. Okay, and I keep using this as an example because in Cleveland, it was one of the things that blew me away when I got there from LA is, I don't know if you know, in Cleveland, they're going K-8 in high school. So when I saw 9th graders, it was the first time, at first it was like, why are these kids so immature? I mean, it was like, imagine if you're a 13-year-old, an 8th grader who never had to go to a locker or do anything else, and you were basically expected to line up just like the 5-year-olds, and then suddenly you get into high school and you have wide open halls and lockers and stuff. Like, it's literally, let your mind go wild. Kids just running around the halls. I mean, it's like recess because they'd never really had to understand, you leave class, you go to your locker, you grab your books, you come to class. Okay? So something like homework it's not just about the content. You're teaching kids really life skills about how the world works and how you have to go here and you have to go there and you do this and you do that. So that would be my concept. So yes, there is homework, and about 10 to 15 minutes per grade is kind of a round number way to look at it. Cool. Yes.
As the high school grades are added to the school, do you have any thoughts on the compatibility between the classical model and the College Credit Plus dual enrollment program that a lot of the students are taking advantage of?
Is it just philosophically, or should it be available? Are you asking about
it? It will be available.
Sure.
Philosophically, do you see that being something that will be problematic for the students that want to take advantage of College Credit Plus, or do you think it can be pretty compatible with the classical model?
I think we can make it compatible. Okay, so again, this is case by case and talking to families. Okay, it's like what I was talking about earlier about if a family wants their child taking some college courses during high school, well, why not? Especially if they're available. And for some people, it's about content. Some people, it might be an economic decision they're making. So, I mean, this is important to recognize. It's not my place to tell you on that. So, for example, I've had kids, if you guys don't know this, I mean, if you guys don't know what College Credit Plus and all that is you can actually take college coursework at a local JC or a 4-year college while you're in high school. So I've had students that have finished 2.5 years of college by the time they graduate from high school. Not only is that potentially cool as far as like content and what I learned in these cool college classes, but that's 2.5 years that you as a parent don't have to pay for. So, and some parents plan that way. Hey, can we get them through a couple years of college before they graduate? Because it's free. When you're at this age, it's free. So why not? So the issue is yes, I'm open to it. What we have to figure out is how do we continue the classical piece so that they graduate with a true classical understanding of education and don't have that forfeited by having gone to college classes maybe at a University of Toledo or something like that. Okay? Okay? So is that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about standardized tests and what the requirements are as compared to public school?
It is a public school, so yes, they have to take standardized tests. I think the big difference is in a classical school, we're not teaching to the tests. Again, sounds like a simple concept. Schools are increasingly teaching to tests. At obnoxious levels is the only way I can put it. Honestly, a kid that's kind of made their way through a classical ed at a rigorous level with high expectations, by the time they get to those tests, they're relatively simple. I don't know if you've seen these tests. Most kids that are well-learned and literate and know their math skills, by the time they're getting to these standardized tests, they don't see them as difficult. Most kids don't. Okay, so I can use both my boys graduated from Ohio schools, and by the time they were taking, at the time was the OGT, now it's the OST. They wondered why anybody why anybody failed it. Like, that shocked them. So we have to. By state, you actually get tested. That's actually how they look at our school to see if we're doing what we're supposed to do.
So along the same lines, is the curriculum in any way dictated by the state?
No. No, and it shouldn't be. And frankly, if you look at what we're doing, it's not a problem. Like, I don't know if have you ever seen the OST or the OGT? That's all right. You haven't missed out on tons. But the issue is that most people, if you're at least relatively well educated, it is not hard. It's not. And a lot of those standardized tests really are not. Okay, so if that's something that you look at, I think you would understand why we don't have to make our curriculum to that test. So, yep. There definitely is tons of logic in middle school and beyond. Remember that kind of the basics of classical education is like early is grammar, which if you kind of look at child development, it's just that this idea that we're like kind of sponges when we're young and you can throw tons and tons of like rote memory, just facts and facts and facts and facts into a young mind. And then by the time they get to middle school, the idea is that they can start to kind of reason through all those ideas, like what is reasoning, what's logic, what does all this mean? And then by the time they're getting into high school, the hope is that you can take all that stuff and actually turn it into some kind of discourse and dialogue and rhetoric where we can have good debates and conversations about ideas. That's kind of the basics of classical education. So, yep.
Someone else is asking, what do you see 10 years from now for NOCA? What's your vision,
wow.
what's your heart, what's your passion? Do you see brand new things?
It's such a small question here. What do I see and what's my heart and my passion? Again, let me start at the end of that question. So let me tell you how I came to this school. So like I said, I just became an empty nester. So in June of this last school year, I decided to step down as a principal in Cleveland Metropolitan School District. So I stepped down. It was kind of a natural break. It's the longest I'd actually been in a large district. I'd been there for 7 years, and I could tell you all my thoughts and what was going on. Okay, so I stepped down. And during my kind of sabbatical, I'm actually a current principal right now. I was asked to kind of come and revamp a charter school, that kind of thing. So I'm currently actually here, but I was off for about 3 to 4 months. And during that 3 to 4 months, I started looking around. And one of the things I looked at was Hillsdale College, because I've had a fascination with Hillsdale College for several years. I've been listening to Dr. Larry Arnn for years and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like, I wonder if there's something in Hillsdale that I could do. And teach would be great, or something along those lines. That's where I bumped into the Barney Charter. And then because I bumped into the Barney Charter, I bumped into the work being done in Northwest Ohio Classical Academy. So that, when you start talking about passion, I'm really excited about this just because for me, and it's not that I've been dishonest for 24 years, this is probably the closest to my own value sets that I've had my entire life. Okay, so when you start talking about debates and stuff like that, watching, I was talking to some of the parents at the last meeting, and the way I kind of described it, one of the parents came up, I totally understand what you mean. I've kind of felt like I've been in like guerrilla warfare for years, just kind of underground, my values, and, so it's going to be kind of nice to be among people that, hey, these are some pretty good ideas. You mean the Judeo-Christian commentary matters and Western traditions matter and this idea? I mean, the answer is yeah. And I was a social studies teacher, so I got to kind of play in that playground a little bit. So that kind of, you can imagine what I would expect it to be in 10 years. So one of the things to kind of give you an idea on that, one of the things I got really excited about, and Lee was there, and I think Janet was there as well, we got to interview some Hillsdale kids coming right out of college. These are kids that'll be graduating in May. It blew my socks off. Like, it was nice. I mean, it was impressive. There was a couple, I was like, wow. And you need to put that, it's just their understanding and their thoughtfulness and their reasoning, how articulate they were, how patient they were in their conversations. And we give them, like, I think, hard questions. So there's a couple questions that are just boom, they're bombs at things you couldn't have prepped for. And they're quite impressive. So when you say, who are we in 10 years? I would say they're little those people. I don't know how that sounds to you, but these are the people that could go into Hillsdale and compete, okay, with some of the best kind of thinkers in the country and make their way through that and not struggle with the curriculum that's there, okay? So what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is sometimes hard to see 10 years in the future, but if I could make little people that are kind of coming out and they could go to a Hillsdale and be right at home, I think I've done a pretty good job. Because I think those kids that we interviewed could compete anywhere. I mean, I've interviewed kids from all over the country. I mean, to kind of compare perspective. So I went to Penn undergrad. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania. So I've been in that kind of, that Ivy League track, and I know all that kind of stuff. I'm an interviewer for Penn, so I'm interviewing people all the time, kids coming out. The kids I saw at Hillsdale could challenge any of the kids that I saw. So increasingly, as I kind of look at that system, when you say, what does it look like? It's us giving them such a strong education that they could go into those spaces and feel good about competing there. And I would say even more important than that, and that's the mushy part of it, I want good, decent human beings coming out of there. I mean, part of what makes classical education great is that we're talking about just being good people, virtuous people who enjoy beauty and truth, people that can go out and have conversations that are relevant conversations about big questions and thoughtful things. So my hope would be that you could walk into our school and you would see a lot of little people like that, asking big questions and thinking like good things and being good to each other, okay? That would be nice. I don't get to see that on a regular basis, by the way. Okay, so you have to understand I've been in a world that's really contrary to that. Like right now I'm in what's called the DOR, the Dropout Recovery School. So these are all the kids that failed out of all the regular schools in Cleveland, and I have them. So they're not necessarily all virtuous and truthful and good to one another on a regular basis. So it's cool to be able to kind of sit in that space and talk about it openly from the time the kid is 5 to 12. Does that answer your question? Yes. Great. Yes?
If this is inappropriate, just tell me to shut up.
No.
What is Mr. Schwenk's personal faith?
That's fine. I'm a Christian. I mean, that's not a hard question to answer.
How would you describe that?
Wow. Okay. Well, I can answer that. Obviously, that's different from what a public education would be.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
so what I'm saying. I grew up in a household that was madly in love with Jesus Christ. And so if you talk about what a Christian is to me, it's somebody who sees Jesus Christ as our Savior, somebody who came, died, rose from the dead, is still around, that the Bible, what it has, is inerrant, and I believe in prayer and salvation. I get it by grace. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on, but I'm a Christian. So yeah, ready guys? Here, I need a pulpit. And then, but yeah, no, I'm a Christian, and not any kind of. So there's a whole kind of argument of were you born into a Christian family or do you have a faith? I would say my faith is very personal. I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's what I call a Christian, not just because I was born into a Christian family. It's part of what drew me to like a Hillsdale. Okay, so I grew up in a conservative Christian home. That's why I'm saying this is probably getting closest to my roots as far as how I look at the world. That's part of why when I talk about this idea of kind of being on sabbatical and kind of finding myself in a reflective stage where I'm looking at this kind of work, it's kind of cool that I get to take something like my faith into a public realm, knowing the public realm and not being disrespectful of it, but understanding like who I am. So yeah, I mean, so if you look at me as a personal person, like right now I'm rereading the entire scripture, so I'm in 1 Chronicles right now and Romans and Psalms and Proverbs, and I'm having very interesting conversations with one of my colleagues right now who's an Orthodox Jew, so we're talking about the Nevim and the Kedv. I mean, I love that stuff. So we could talk apologetics, Judeo-Christian commentary for hours and hours and hours. Does that work? Okay.